Hello, this is Jeff Nyquist with another edition of Friends and Enemies. I'm in the United States. My co-host Alex Benesch is in Germany. We're covering the ongoing crisis with Russia and Ukraine, the United States. There's all kinds of things swirling around. Uh, there was the phone call between Trump and Putin this week, and I'll read one little comment to start off. That was a tweet by former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev. And he said, Medvedev said, the phone call between Presidents Putin and Trump proved a well known idea. There is only Russia and America in the dining room. On the menu, light appetizers, Brussels sprouts, British fish and chips, and Paris rooster. The main course is a Kiev-style cutlet. Enjoy your meal.
How do they let
So,
this
Alex,
guy still talk? I mean, it's like
he's
somebody.
the deputy head of the Security Council. You know, he's
Hmm.
the former president. He's one of Putin's many right arms, right?
Well, so far, I mean,
So
until
far,
he
but no,
outlives
this
his
is the.
usefulness.
But he's talked about Europe from Vladivostok to Lisbon. You know, this whole thing. The Russians. We didn't know. For many people, and I followed. John Mosier's work, the military historian. I've watched the different channels looking at the Ukraine war. The Russians are suffering these battlefield defeats, these terrible losses, and yet, um, and the Russian economy is supposedly suffering. And you'd think the Russians are eager to make peace, but here, Trump twists Ukraine's arm. He kicks Ukraine. He tries to humiliate the Ukrainian president in the Oval Office. And then Ukraine cries uncle and says, all right, we'll agree to the ceasefire. And you think, oh, the Russians are going to get what they want. No, the Russians double their demands, want all the territory in the four oblasts that they've invaded in Ukraine. They want the city of Zaporozhye. They want this. They want that. They basically want Ukraine collapsed and handed over to them on a silver platter. You see this tweet from Medvedev, and then you see with this phone call between Trump and Zelensky, I'm sorry, between Trump and Putin, rather, that Putin, while he's supposed to be on the phone with Trump, is on Russian TV in a talk
Yeah.
show sitting next to this guy saying, well, the guy says, well, aren't you supposed to be in a phone call with Trump?
I don't
Oh,
listen
this
to
is a real
Peskov.
conversation. Trump will learn, we'll make him wait. And there's Trump in the Oval Office holding the phone thinking, waiting for Vladimir, saying, well, we're still waiting on the Russian president.
Yeah. I mean,
He
that's
purposely, yeah,
yeah, that's Putin's. I mean, that's always been Putin's game. He plays the cool guy. He's unfazed by anything. I mean, his crumbling military, the staggering losses of the Russian military, and the massive problem that keep piling up. I mean, the Russians now spend so much of their money on the military, and still they can't come up with the numbers. The big spending, and I mean, Europe can just, even just Europe can outspend Russia by almost an order of magnitude, or basically by an order of magnitude. But it's
but
Putin's
are the
game, and
Russians sandbagging? Are
it's
they
Putin's game.
sandbagging?
I mean, the Russians have been very, very consistent in their crazy communication. Everything from the words, the style, the behavior. When Putin was asked about that phone call, and a reporter or whatever said that, well, according to your speaker Peskov, it should be start now or something, and Putin was just like giggling and said, don't listen to Peskov. He's playing that cool guy, and it's kind of this um
Didn't he
well.
say Peskov lies all the time? Didn't he say something like
No, he
that?
was just. I
I
think it
don't
was just a
listen to him
moment of. It was
because he
just.
lies.
It was just a moment of like Putin trying to be super cool, and like nothing
Yeah.
phases him. I don't listen to my speaker. It's just like, it's a joke. It's so funny, right? And so the Russians, they have this well crafted strategy of how they perceive what they say, how they say it. Now we go to the Americans. It's very much different. And the Europeans are different.
Hmm.
The Europeans now, almost all Europeans are now locked in, and they say Russia is terrible, Russia is horrible. We need to gear up. There needs to be what they call for a new draft or a mandatory military service in France. You know, they
But
say
that's gonna take years, and Ukraine needs help
I
now.
know, but it's like when you compare these different communication strategies, Europe is very very locked in into this very clear position. We go to America, it's paradoxical, and I think it's extremely paradoxical. Now, for example, Witkoff, the guy that was sent to Russia to do the actual talking, you know, for hours before the phone call between Trump and Putin, this Witkoff guy, he's now doing the media tour, and he was talking, I think, to Tucker Carlson. And we know about Tucker, we know where he stands, or pretends to stand, or whatever. And so Witkoff makes these statements, blah blah blah, and then of course outrage, understandably, online on Twitter, and they say, how dare Witkoff not condemn Putin and his war of aggression and the stolen children and the death and the torture and blah blah blah. Well, fair point, but it's not at this moment in time. It's not Witkoff's job to say his honest opinion about the Russians. It's Witkoff's job to maybe get some kind of deal, to stall for time at best, or just to show the world that America is trying. I mean, maybe they've already given up a long time ago, but right now America needs to be seen as trying. They give Russia a chance to make things not right, but a bit less wrong. And if Russia declines, which they're not doing everywhere, it might the communication strategy of the American administration might actually change. So we mentioned all these different statements over the last couple of weeks. Horrendous statements about Ukraine, great statements about Ukraine, and I have another example of this here. Now this is the website state.gov. No, obviously that's the government website here. Okay, so. Now you go to, I think it was this tab here, policy issues. Okay, maybe it's not exactly doing the drop downs here. Well, never mind. If you look for a specific country, right? I mean, for example, you type in Ukraine. Or you pick this tab here, this sub-tab. It's called United with Ukraine. Okay? And so if you look at that website and all the different points, I mean, that's exactly what we would like all the administration to sound like. I mean, this is the great stuff. This is what we hope for. This is what we would like. And it's here in a sub-menu of a menu tab. And there's great sounding stuff in there, right? This is how paradoxical the communication is. So here's kind of the overview, United with Ukraine. Then there's a how to help tab. Then there's a tab called holding Russia and Belarus to account. And then there's this, Russia's filtration operations. So this is about how the United States provides assistance, advocates diplomacy, and enforces economic measures to counter Russia's actions against Ukraine. So people can scroll down. There's a video. It's different headlines. International principles challenged by Russia. Moscow's actions in Ukraine threaten to set new precedents on European soil, undermining these basic international principles vital to peace and security. And they go into all these things. U.S. support for Ukraine, sanctions and economic measures, more resources, atrocity crimes advisory group, U.S. mission to NATO, blah, blah, blah. Then there's this, Russian aggression, exposing Russia's destabilizing actions. Civilians continue to suffer as Russia's aggression against Ukraine intensifies. Blah, 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 blah. Energy prices, cybersecurity. It says here, ahead of its invasion of Ukraine, the Russian government launched wide-scale malicious cyber activity against the Ukrainian government and banking systems. The United States had already been working with the government of Ukraine and other partners to help them respond and recover from cyber incidents, and so on and so forth. And of course, we know the statements of Donald Trump. Trump has always been very clear on the Nord Stream pipeline, saying this was the stupidest idea, especially for Europe. It's horrendous. And it needs to be stopped, and he wants to stop the Nord Stream pipelines, and just different examples. So it's like a paradoxical communication that we see in the States, And then we see kind of a clearer, more coherent sounding media strategy in Europe. And then, of course, we have the Russian strategy of communication. Which is basically the Russians set the talking points, and then they adapt these talking points to the different target groups, and then feed these talking points through influencers and proxies and whatnot. Feed it to these specific target audience groups. And so, it's like, okay, we've heard some great Republicans being very clear on Ukraine, very clear on Russia, saying the right things, saying like Scott Bessent saying we should go, maybe we can go to a 10 with the sanctions, a 10 out of 10 with the sanctions. So these powers, America and Russia, these powers are talking to each other indirectly. They're making advances, they're making threats. And the Associated Press had this recently, I think this is from this week. It says, Western officials say Russia is behind a campaign of sabotage across Europe. So everything from trying to bring down airliners to trying to assassinate, trying to assassinate the head or a very important person from it was a German defense company, right?
Yeah, I remember that. You saw what happened at Heathrow, the power substation that blew up. We also at Norfolk, I think the same day, we had power outages where the backup power at Norfolk, which is where the U.S. has a major naval facility, very strange. And, sources in Britain have said that this was a Russian attack. Behind the scenes, I've got information saying that this was a Russian attack on the UK. I think it's logical to assume that certain outages and problems in the US are similarly motivated, that there is a campaign of sabotage and cyber warfare against the US, Germany, Great Britain, probably France. I don't know what's going on there, but I know that day before yesterday, there was jamming from the Russians in Germany. There were cyber attacks, I believe, in Germany. I think you were having computer problems here today. I think something's going on, and there were. I followed this the day before yesterday. More than the normal emergency action messages to all stations from the U.S. Global Command. There was a 164 character message, emergency action message yesterday, which is Friday. We're broadcasting on Saturday. That was unusual for its length. Maybe it had to do with the USS Truman in the Red Sea, but I think there's a lot of activity going on. Day before yesterday, Russia, China, North Korea turned off their military aircraft transponders. The Japanese followed suit. Later, NATO did. Then they all came back on again. Very strange posturing activity with, like I say again, larger than the normal emergency action messages. We know there's trouble in Iran as well with the Iranian regime. And of course, Russia is, there's indications that Russia is airlifting troops back into the Kaliningrad salient between Poland and Lithuania.
And it's part of it. It's part of this negotiation, right? I mean, if there's high level talks, I mean, some points do not have to be made explicitly, right? But if you see a campaign of sabotage, assassination attempts, this, that, and the other, bringing down airliners, and also the threat that I mentioned in one of the early episodes when there was a nuclear materials smuggle since 1991, bringing in highly enriched uranium and plutonium, bit by bit, 100 grams here, 200 grams there, just finding its way into Western Europe. This can be used for nuclear terrorism, especially
dirty bombs.
Yeah, and also maybe even an actual bomb if the material is there, right? If the other components are there, if they actually smuggle a small warhead. I mean, they had like these miniature warheads in communist East Germany. They made like this extremely small nuclear warheads, and they had like this 3,500 man group who was supposed to sabotage Western Germany, for example, with assassinations or with these micro nukes. So you can smuggle in a micro nuke into an important place, a neuralgic point, as they call it, and then you detonate, you bring the whole place down with one little bomb.
Well, my friend, the late Colonel Stanislav Lunev, testified before Congress back in, was it 1999? Testified about the GRU planting or finding secret locations to stash nuclear weapons in the United States. And of course, that's also done in Europe. And I think around that time, Switzerland found a cache of Russian weapons, not nuclear, but conventional weapons, for Spetsnaz commandos to get it to use in Switzerland. Yeah. This was 26 years ago. It's a serious thing. They have the Russians set up stockpiles for their Spetsnaz commandos inside enemy countries. And I watched, there have been Russian infiltrators across the Polish and the Baltic states border in recent weeks. In fact, day before yesterday, I watched a camera on the Lithuanian border where it just happened, as we were watching the camera, it just happened that 12 black-clad Russians, I assume they're Russians, not really Belarusians, led by a man in a white sweater, all wearing black ski masks, come with a ladder to the barbed wire on the border, started putting the ladder on the board, and this is in broad daylight, there's snow on the ground, and all of a sudden a Lithuanian patrol vehicle comes by and they retreat back to the Belarusian side of the border.
Great. Yeah, and it's like
so they were trying to smuggle a 12-man team across the day before yesterday, right?
And it's part of the negotiation, right? Russia does this campaign, and there's been press reports for the last, I don't know how many months, trying to bring down an airliner, trying to assassinate the head of or important person from a weapons manufacturer in Germany. So the Russians do this thing, and then, of course, this becomes part of the negotiation about Ukraine. The Russians either explicitly or implicitly say, if we can get a bigger piece of Ukraine, if we can get this, if we can get that, then we will stop doing this, doing this sabotage campaign, right? It's like it's like pay us protection money. You pay and we will leave you alone, maybe, for the time being. And then we had this. This is from like 2 days ago, a couple of days ago. Headline: Germany confiscates Russian Shadow Fleet tanker with $43 million of oil. Germany now owns the tanker and is considering a name change. Interesting.
Good, I like that. Well, did you see that in the day before yesterday, a Russian Shadow Fleet cargo ship rammed a tanker in the Sea of Marmara? That's between the Dardanelles and the Bosphorus. Did you see? I watched the video several times. That Russian ship just steered right at that tanker and just rammed the rear of the tanker, probably doing really damage to the engine compartment and of course the screw, the prop at the bottom of the propulsion system of the ship. I mean, the Russians are, and then there was on the same day a Russian ship trying to drag its anchor in the middle of the Baltic, trying to cut cables. I think it was NATO, patrol ships chased it away because it made a U-turn and headed back in the direction of St. Petersburg. But the Russians are actively sabotaging in a campaign at sea and on land.
Yeah, and we can expect, if the negotiations are not going the way the Russians wanted to go, if the Russians then actually do blow up an airliner, if they do something drastic that impacts people's lives, something that is truly shocking, we can expect the bloggers, the video influencers, the live streamers, we can expect these influencers to then claim it was a false flag by the globalists, of course, and that Russia is not to blame.
Inside job, right?
Exactly. So
we're doing it to ourselves. We're attacking our own infrastructure.
Sure.
And because we want to threaten Russia, we want to blame it on the nice Mr. Putin, who's really a good guy, right?
Yeah. And I mean,
according
of course,
to Scott Ritter and Colonel
there are fairly recent studies from academics in Germany where they talk as much as it's possible in this day and age, talk about the sabotage troops, the sabotage specialists that used to be stationed in
Spetsnaz, yeah.
Well, it's like it's part of different aspects of training, and they had like this. They called it something like what was it? AGM or AGMS, Special Tasks, Sonderaufgaben, that sort of name. And these were 3,500 men who are part spy, part special operator, and they had
part saboteur,
and they had weekly updated lists of people to assassinate and places to destroy and infrastructure to destroy in a sabotage campaign. This is before the Red Army then moves in. You just blindside the enemy, you just hit them at his neuralgic points, and then you send in the tanks. I mean, the favorite bit from that tanker story, because I think this came from Der Spiegel magazine. My favorite line was this. It says, "The Kremlin, through spokesman Dmitry Peskov, has stated that it has no information about the ship or knowledge of its owner." All right, if the Russians don't claim it's theirs, let's get all of them. Let's get all of these, confiscate all of these shadow tankers, because the Russians say, they don't belong to Russia. It's not theirs, right? Let's get all of them. And it's like when we refuse to do business with the Russians, they call it the meanest sabotage. They call it like the biggest, gravest attack on their statehood, and this gives them the right to do anything. But it's just refusing to do business. It's just saying we'll buy our energy from somewhere else and we sell our products to some other place. And these Russians, they have to make things on their own. They have to innovate on their own. And this is something that would become serious. I mean, we heard the story, I think last week, about the losses that are being racked up by the Gazprom company, or one of the associates or daughter companies,
the Russians
or
are bleeding
proxies.
cash.
And they're like 13 billion loss or something or the other. And of course, if you confiscate one tanker and it's $43 million of oil, plus a ship, of course, it does add up, doesn't it? I mean, it does get expensive.
Well, the Russians,
over time.
I think, the Russian resources, the size of the Russian economy is misunderstood. I think it was Viktor Suvorov who pointed out in World War II that the German economy in 1941, when Germany attacked the Soviet Union, was 5 times larger in gross domestic product estimated than the Soviet Union. But the Soviet production capacity, military production capacity, was many, many times greater than the German.
Yeah, because the Germans.
This is what we see today.
Yeah, but still, I mean, the Germans. I mean, in the Nazi era, I think there's a pretty good book on this. It's called "The Wages of Destruction" by some author, I think named something Tool, I think, if I remember correctly, and he explains the dysfunctionalities of the Nazi economy, where ammunition production was a joke, compared to what it should have been, and all these other examples. So the output was severely limited by that crazy party structure, a structure that many people now online crave. They want a structure like this.
It's very corrupt structure. That's
and it's like
understand.
Ideology over everything.
Reich
it's like
a corrupt regime.
It's like you appoint some guy to handle production in a specific area. You appoint a guy who is not qualified.
Hermann Goering,
or an architect. You pick an architect, Albert Speer, and make him set him in charge of production, because Hitler.
They call him the miracle worker, right?
Yeah, because Hitler liked the guy, and he liked the architecture of Albert Speer.
He was better than Todt, wasn't he? He was better than Todt, his predecessor, who died very suspiciously in a plane crash, didn't he? Taking off from the Wolf's Lair.
Yeah.
What was that? Was he assassinated? Did Hitler get annoyed at him?
It's like, I mean, it was so dysfunctional that there was this is, I think, from Albert Speer's memories, and of course people should always read these things with caution, very much
A
caution.
malignant narcissist, by the way, Albert Speer, almost
Well,
certainly a malignant
weren't they all? I mean,
weren't
and
they all?
he relates
Psychopaths
that
and
story,
malignant narcissists. Yeah.
and he relates that one story when he was visiting a production plant, I think airplanes, fighter planes of some sort, a German factory, and the guy who ran the factory, he was bringing Albert Speer into a special office, and this is where they had the numbers. What this factory was producing, what the output was of the German war production, and then they had compared it to the current production of the United States of America. And the guy was crying. The guy was in tears because America was outdoing us. They were outproducing us by a huge amount, and so it's the race is much closer than it should be today. Of course, I mean the Russians, they have their weaknesses, the Russians have their strengths.
They do,
and it's
but
every decision.
It's funny.
Every mistake we
now,
make could be unfixable. Every mistake we now make is irredeemable.
Well, let me run this quote by you. This is Victor Davis Hanson, has been quoted this past week. In the absence, European military security would require Europeans to prune back their social welfare state, frack, that is, use fracking for oil, use nuclear energy, stop the green obsession, and spend 3 to 5% of their GDP on defense. And then he sarcastically says, promises, right? So the thing is that everybody who's watching these security conferences of NATO, European NATO leaders, and their commitment, like Macron's speeches about going it alone, and France is going to provide a nuclear umbrella, and France is going to do this. The Russians are openly mocking that. I think Foreign Minister Lavrov has openly mocked Macron. Russia just threatens them. And then you have this, like you say, wave of sabotage attacks on Germany. Like, you better not turn your defense industry to pumping out things. Yeah, and the ability to sabotage these European defense industries. Have you seen some of these reports over the last 18 months about sabotage of these industries in the UK and Germany? I mean, have you seen this?
But what was the
Russians' work?
But it usually is. I mean, what was the last really the last decisive, impressive victory of the Russians? I mean, we think about the two wars in Chechnya, and that sort of thing. I mean, they will laugh at anything. They will pretend they're omnipotent, omniscient, and everything else in between. Well,
do you see, the thing is Alex, the Russians lose and their allies lose on the battlefield, but they win in the negotiations. You look at the Vietnam War. Many people have compared this war in Ukraine to the Vietnam War, and they have said, look, you look at the Tet Offensive, the Easter Offensive in 1972. The communists were smashed, and these were Russian military advisors, Russian equipment. Russian officers guiding the North Vietnamese anti-aircraft troops. It was the Russians had their hand deep in the war in Southeast Asia. That's been hidden from history. But in the end, everything was given away at the negotiation table, and the Americans pulled the rug out from under the Republic of Vietnam and the Army of the Republic of Vietnam, and South Vietnam is communist now. They're aligned with Russia. Yeah, they're aligned with China.
We did a whole show on how a nuclear war is fought. We talked about the old anti rocket systems, like the Nike Hercules system, where you shoot nukes against an oncoming volley of enemy nukes.
Which America took down the Nike system. We took it down in the 60s.
Because if a larger strike is ordered, they will shoot X amount of rockets in a volley, then they shoot another volley of rockets here, another volley there. So you could actually intercept multiple missiles with one intercepting nuclear missile.
That's right. Right.
And it's like, I mean, the situation today, I think it's so dynamic. If a game changer happens, a game-changing technology happens, I think it could unbalance certain plans of the Russians, because if it's not Vietnam era anymore, and it's about innovation. And I think that over the last 10 years, German companies, not just outright defense companies, but they mostly them, but also other companies that are relevant to defense. All these German companies, they've completely revamped their security system and their cybersecurity. They've moved over to a zero trust architecture. Now that means you consider anybody a potential insider threat. You know, somebody who steals information, somebody who tries to put something on systems. And in a lot of these companies, they don't have all these workstations anymore. You know, if you go to these offices, you know, it used to be all Windows workstations everywhere, and you know, the cleaning lady could at night could maybe try to steal some data or copy a drive and stuff like that, or install a keylogger. But they're not there anymore, because everybody has to use these standardized laptops and take them home with them. And so even if you're alone in the building at night as the cleaning lady or the facility guy or whatever, there's nothing there. There's nothing there. And they have, I mean, these companies here, of course, they've become sort of multinational in a sense that they sell to various countries and they have subsidiaries and all that.
In other words, you don't have any faith in the German arms industry. You think that it's going to fail?
No. I'm just saying. There's a lot of stuff that happened that doesn't make the news necessarily, but the security has been ramped up significantly.
Been lagged. Oh, really?
And we saw that. We saw that in Ukraine. I mean, we saw that on the website that I just showed to people, state.gov, State Department website, when they talked about the Russian cyber attacks. Russian cyber attacks against Ukraine in connection with the invasion. And there was some reports concerning companies, American companies like Microsoft and others, and they worked overtime when the invasion started to keep Ukrainian systems, you keep the lights on in Ukraine. And people expected much worse.
America and Germany are both so heavily infiltrated on the corporate and the government side by communists, by people who really are working for Beijing and
we also
Moscow.
It's never been more dangerous than now. And of course, catching spies and traitors, catching these guys is a top priority. And
But are we catching them?
Well, there have been reports over the last 10 years from Europe where they say, okay, here was a Russian operation was busted. Here is another couple. There was a sleeper couple, I think, in Slovenia or something. It's a small country in Europe, not far away from Germany. And there was this couple, and they claimed to have come, I think, from Canada. So and before they were in Canada, they supposedly came from Latin America or something, right? So it's a classic sleeper agent strategy. You establish.
But they were Russians.
Yeah.
Right? They were Russians.
Yeah. So you establish a fake history in one country, then you move them to the next. They spend a couple of years in that other country to create a ledger, a false life, and then you move them from, let's say, Canada to Europe or the United States. And so when they moved them from, I think it was Canada, to the small European country, they led this normal-looking life. They had children. I mean, remember, these are KGB agents, basically, or whatever they call themselves these days, the SVR or whatever. But these were essentially KGB agents who were married. They were ordered to be married. This is part of their job.
Actually,
and they had
KGB
children.
officers, these aren't just agents.
They had actual, because this is how they do it, they had actual children.
Oh, yeah.
The woman got pregnant from the other KGB guy. I mean, imagine, right? Getting pregnant from the KGB guy.
And they raised their children to be also assets of the Russian
but they got caught before they could recruit their own children, because his children were still too young, and they were quite surprised to find out that their parents were spies and that they had to leave the country. But it was like, imagine the woman gets pregnant, the one KGB officer gets pregnant from the other KGB guy. they do the ultrasound, they do the whole family stuff, and then there's a birth, and then they tell the neighbors, and they have some friends, and at work, and then they have to raise the children. The sleepless nights, and
And they think they have to do, yeah, imagine if you're a 10-year-old boy who thinks he's an American and
yeah,
he's suddenly taken back to Russia because his
you
parents
have no
turned out to be
citizenship.
sleeper agents.
You have no citizenship, right?
That's
And like
weird.
in this
That's
pair,
really weird.
they became part of several operations in Europe, and they had to interlock with other assets in Europe. Of course, the way it's played, one sleeper agent couple, they don't know the identities of other Russian agents, but sometimes they work together in operations. And so these two guys were caught. They were actually caught in the investigating police. They found, or the intelligence agency of that country, they found the new communication devices which the Russians are using. They said they had a specific component inside of their, I think, Windows computers or Apple computers, and there was a specific device made by Russian intelligence, so you can have a remote communication. So not necessarily the old dead drops where you go to a specific place and put something in a bag under a bridge, but a faster way. You can upload information, upload data, and you can download data and your new missions and your new whatever instructions. And sometimes you have to meet your handler, of course, because that's standard. But they got caught, and this happened more and more and more over the last 10 years, especially since Crimea in 2014. And I mean, of course, in the press, they can't tell the specifics, why they were caught, how they were caught, but we can kind of puzzle it together, because the Russians, they still operate from the same template that they always used, and they move their assets around, they do these certain things. But nowadays, everything is surveilled, everything is logged. Every time you use an internet, every time there's a camera or a license plate scanner, your movements, you cross a border in Europe. I mean, officially, no more borders in Europe, right? I can get into my car and I can drive all the way to Spain and to Portugal and to France and Italy. I can drive wherever I want, but I'm being scanned at every point of my way. Every single point of my way. There's always traces. You always leave traces behind. And when you overlay these patterns, when you have algorithms and machine learning, you can sort of, you have a computer system that can see things that humans can't see. This is how some of the bigger spies got caught in the past, when these computers were being used more often. When a specific person is in a specific place at a specific time, and there's also another suspect or a confirmed spy on the same day, same area, same place, it rings an alarm bell. And you can narrow it down. You have a list of suspects, and you can trace them more and more and more until you catch them, and you can get a warrant, and then you find these guys are not what they claim to be. These are KGB officers who are married and have children. So the game has become harder for the Russians. I mean, it's like there's so many problems here and so many weaknesses, but there's also some signs that people take this a lot more serious for the last 10 years. And it's like when we talked about in last episode, when we talked about these these dark enlightenment people and this ideology that Russia is spreading everywhere. I mean, it's easy to spot.
They are spreading it. Yeah.
It's easy to spot the people who are spreading it. I've seen pictures of overlaying forensic quality computer graphics when they trace a piece of disinformation, where it appears first, how it then spreads from influencer to influencer, in what time frame, and then you can trace an influencer's behavior week after week, month after month, year after year. And then you can overlay these graphics and say, this guy has been doing nothing but Russian propaganda points on time, in an organized way. It's completely in sync with what the Russians are doing. And when you have forensic quality evidence, this can be used in court at some later stage in the game.
Well, I hope they do. 9 years ago, I never foresaw this pro-Russian ideology overtaking the Republican Party and MAGA. And I now see that it's integral to MAGA and to Donald Trump. MAGA, I think, is a misnomer. It's a self-misunderstanding. It's got to be make Russia great again, right?
Well, what do
I
they
mean, the
mean by
intellectual
great?
argument,
What do they really mean by great?
make
What's
Russia
their
great again. I
definition of
mean,
great?
look at being busy with ongoing events, following things. It's easy to miss, the work of these ideologists like Curtis Yarvin, aka Mencius Moldbug, and how these Hillsdale and Claremont intellectuals, people like Michael Anton. I just read Michael Anton's book, finished reading it this past week, and the latter part of the book, he discusses a civil war. He discusses the advent of an American Caesar. I've mentioned this possibility, but the way he discusses it, he doesn't mention the Constitution. Now, I don't in Origins of the Fourth World War, written years ago, because I'm looking at a scenario of America being bombed and invaded by the Russians and Chinese, which is something I've seen for 30 years as a long-term threat. This is what they intend. You look at the defector literature and you realize they're on a long-term strategy. They're coming for the United States, but Michael Anton's writing this about, it's just internal America. He doesn't see a threat. He sees Russia and China as not being the important thing. It's the American domestic left that has to be eliminated. And this is when you see, if you look at Mencius Moldbug, aka Curtis Yarvin, and you read his book on the technology and the Brown Scare, his red pill, the red pill of Curtis Yarvin is this: America is the communist country, and he actually says this, that FDR and Alger Hiss were really Stalin's bosses. They weren't useful idiots and dupes or Soviet agents. Stalin was their agent, that America's the communist country, and that Russia's really the good country. So it's not a mystery then, just before the Russian invasion of Ukraine, Yarvin writes this piece saying that Ukraine is a fake country. There is no such thing as, basically parroting what Putin would say just on the eve of the invasion a couple weeks later, 4 weeks later, and saying that and that subtitle of his article is Russia should have a free hand in Europe. This is what Curtis Yarvin is like. Is he a Russian agent? Was he trained by Dugin? I'm asking the question because it sounds like it to me. When I hear this stuff, it's like, how could anyone go from being an American, supposedly a libertarian and a conservative, or whatever he is, a libertarian, and then go to being pro-Russian, giving Russia a free hand in Europe, and not be either insane or being a Russian, some kind of a Russian agent of influence, right?
Yeah,
Or a useful idiot?
I mean, if we put ourselves mentally as an experiment, if you put ourselves in the minds of the Russians, the Russian planners, right? They look at America and they see people like Elon Musk, and they see others in business and politics, right? And so then the Russians say, well, these guys are like Elon. These guys are very rich and they have status and everybody knows their faces and some people admire them. And well, they are like aristocrats, but they don't have a title. And they don't have a real aristocratic title. It's not a hereditary title either, so they can't pass it on to their children. And Elon, I mean, fair enough. I mean, Elon considers himself very, very smart, so he wants to have many, many children. There's scientific literature that truly suggests that we are going to have a serious demographic problem in the West in the future. People don't want to have kids anymore. They have too few kids and all that. So yeah, fair enough. Let's say Elon wants to have many, many children. But then come the Russians and they think that, well, wouldn't it be advantageous for Russia if we plant this idea, we seed this idea in the heads of people like Elon Musk, you should be a proper aristocrat. You should have a real title and specific authority, bigger authority that comes with the title. And it should be a hereditary title. You should give it, hand it to your children. Your children are now princes, and so on. And so this is kind of how the Russians would lure in or try to lure in these Americans. And of course, there's older families in the States, and they've been around for a long time, and their members are judges and politicians and business guys and whatever. And also, a message could be targeted at them. You should be actual aristocrats. You shouldn't be bound by a stupid government structure. You shouldn't be bound by the Democrat, not the Democratic Party, but democratic elections. None of that silliness. You should be aristocrats. And we Russians, we have also realized this. We want to go back to the aristocracy. And maybe in the future, the Russians can insinuate, maybe in the future we will actually give out titles to these high-ranking Russians and call them, czars and counts and all these classic titles, right? And we talked about this on the show before. If people have missed it, there was a young, fairly young, I believe. Vladimir Putin was still in his 30s or early 30s or mid 30s, and Putin was already a KGB officer, and he visits a German princess, a German princess in Hessen, which I think bordered the former East German communist state. So we learned the story. A young Putin KGB officer goes to this castle in Hessen and visits this princess. And she had all the contacts, billionaire businessmen, right-wing billionaire businessmen, royalty, politics, you name it. She had all the contacts. And so I got the books which this lady wrote, a princess from a very old family that actually was around in Russia, in Tsarist Russia for a long time. And then his family had to escape from the communists. And so she wrote these books later on, and she insinuates that there was this great underground, fantastic underground conservative monarchist movement inside the Soviet Union. And this movement preserved, like in some silly mystery novel, this movement preserved the true nature, the godly blessed nature of Mother Russia, preserved it, helped to bring down communism, or actually brought down communism for the most part. And Putin supposedly was a member of that underground, and Sobchak was a member, blah, 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 blah. So this sounds exactly like another trust-style operation, but the target audience for this trust operations was not the regular, MAGA types, the regular activists in the West, but the target audience was high rollers, business guys, billionaires, aristocrats, you name it, right? High-ranking politicians. And so we have to assume the Russians will try that again, targeting people like Elon. Excuse me. And so I got this story here. This is from the Byline Times. Never heard of that publication before. And the headline is this: Musk's Doge is inspired by pro-Kremlin monarchists in 1930s techno-fascism. Alrighty.
Yarvin, by the way, was discussing using Elon Musk 2 years ago as a kind of dictator creating government efficiency programs. This is amazing.
Yeah, and what I don't like about this piece, because we already dealt with the subject, and I think we got quite a bit deeper than this story. What I don't like about this piece is that they frame technocracy as an ideology. They frame technocracy as right-wing. But we actually found out that it had a lot in common with socialism, because if you read the foundational works of these technocrats, for example, stuff from the organizations that Elon's grandfather was attached to, right? In Canada before he went to South Africa, and so this was the foundational texts. They sounded a lot like socialism, but with a new coat of paint. They said, well, it's not going to be, everything is not going to be controlled by a communist party of ideological guys and bureaucrats, but it's going to be the scientists. And they will assign to you at birth contingents, right? They have a file system, what you can possibly get from the system, and what they have in store for you, the resources you'll be getting. And they also, I mean, you can, it sounds a bit like these dystopian novels, like Brave New World. In a technocratic system, the scientists will assess the new citizens, the new subjects, the young people, how intelligent they are. If they are suitable for science or they have to do some other job. And so it sounded very much like socialism.
This is Guillaume Fay's Archaeofuturism book, right? And what's interesting about this book, and it's crazy. I mean, he's passed away. I wrote a review of this book, and people said, "Oh, he can't possibly mean this." This is Arctos Publishing, and of course, it's Dugin's. It's Dugin's thing. These are Duginists, and he wants to make a Europe where the capital is Moscow. And he's French, right?
Okay.
You could tell by his name. And of course, he's talking about genetically engineered human beings, robotics, this science fiction. They're bridging futurism with Dugin's Eurasianism, which is an aspect. They want to have this forward-looking thing. And of course, if you go to their website, the Arctos.com website, you'll see articles about how Trump, it's called esoteric Trumpism.
Oh, great.
And they which is like esoteric Hitlerism, right? Which is really weird, which is part of the red-brown thing. And here you have a kind of a mix of Aryan techno-fascism here in Fay's writings, which is, I think this book was written 2010. Let's see when. Well, this is the English translation, and I think it came out in 2010. In the English translation. So I think the French must have come out a year or two earlier than that. So this is more than 15 years old, but it's exactly what, fits in with what Yarvin is doing. And of course, what you see with these anarcho-libertarians also have a version of this. And this is among the right-wing, alt-right, archaeofuturism is alt-right.
Yeah, and it bleeds into this. It bleeds
propaganda,
into this. Yeah, it bleeds into this anti-woman movement. The red pill, black pill, men going their own way thing. Yeah, men going their own way. Because I saw this clip recently on TikTok. That's a platform where, some woman talked about, well, couldn't there be robots or androids in the near future? Androids who are better than real men, and wouldn't this be great? Women don't need traditional men anymore. And then this other guy commented,
women have the state to support them. They don't need men.
And
just
then
kick
this
your
guy
husband to the curb and get on welfare.
And then this other guy chimed in and he said, well, imagine that these robots become available and they're quite expensive and maintenance costs and everything. So you would have, as a woman, you would have to pay for it yourself because you have no real man in your life who can help you with cost. So you would have to pay for this robot, pay for the maintenance, and be financially responsible for that thing. No. And then the guy says, well, and then the guy says, well, if a real man buys himself an android woman, a robot, artificial woman, then the man would be happy, he said, because, the man pays his stuff and he keeps his own money. He doesn't have to share his money with a real woman. So the man can buy a robot.
Would he have robot babies with the robot?
Well, and so his argument was that this robot future would be more beneficial for men because men make their own money, and then the woman robot, the female robot, would then just be there for pleasure, right? And
or do all the cooking and cleaning.
Yeah, cooking, cleaning, and giving the man
no kids, right?
Yeah, and
Yeah.
giving the man motivation and telling the man how great he is every day. And so this is like the level of discussion we have right now. And it's like when I saw these Dugin types years ago just condemn scientific progress and say the globalists, the Jewish world conspiracy, blah, 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 that they run technocracy. They run this anti-human technological program, right? But here you just shown us that these Dugin guys, they're paradoxical
They're on
about
the other
this. They don't
side.
care.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. Yeah, there's no consistency. They're on both sides of every issue. I had a conversation with an expert on Russia's activity in the third world, in certain third world countries, and she was telling me about. She got interested in my work about the scissor strategy and the false opposing movements. False opposites. And she said, this is going on in these other countries, and I'm seeing it in real time. And the Russians are doing it, and they're taking over countries doing this, third world countries. And yeah, it's real. And they've done it to the United States. It's not just the third world countries or banana
Yeah,
republics that the Russians are doing this in. They're doing it right in the US and in Germany. Look at the AfD. I
yeah.
mean, what is your new chancellor going to do? What kind of coalition is he going to form now?
Well, it's gonna be like what we call the big coalition. It's like the Conservative Party and the Social Democrats. But there's people, high-ranking people, have now left the top positions of the Social Democratic Party. We'll see about that. But the AfD.
Where did they go? Which party did they go to if they left the Social
Well, they
Democrats?
left the top positions. They didn't
Oh, I
necessarily
see.
leave the party, but it's like a couple of new faces coming in, and it's like when you look at these AfD guys, right? They're so hyped up, with the black pill, man and Russia and all that stuff mixed in together. But
Is it Alex Jones auf Deutsch?
well, I mean, it's like everybody watches everything. So we had a case of let's call it domestic terrorism, right? There was a guy who was very, very frustrated. A man who was completely unhappy with his life. He was in debt, and he fell for this extreme COVID propaganda on the internet. So he ruined his career. Was in a lot of debt. Very aggressive. And then so he goes to a gas station. And gas stations here, they sell everything. They sell alcohol. They sell frozen pizzas. You can buy anything in a gas station in Germany. And so he goes to this gas station.
Same thing here. Yeah, same thing here.
And he goes to the gas station. And this young guy, this like 20-year-old guy at the counter, was like a student or something. The guy at the counter says, sir, would you please wear the face mask? Because this was like in the worst bit of the pandemic. And we have lots of old people here with pre-existing conditions. So, go figure. And so he said, would you please wear a mask? And this is when the guy got really mad. I think he went home, got his gun, went back to the gas station, and shot that young man to death.
Oh, that's terrible.
And so then, when the I found documents from the investigation and I think the court case, and this guy was a listener of Alex Jones because he was good with the language, and he was listening to Alex Jones. Now, of course, there's crazies everywhere. I understand that. But
this is what's so free speech is a responsibility.
yeah.
Alex Jones is a highly irresponsible person. Free speech is a responsibility. When you have people that listen to you and you are saying things, you got to understand there are people who can be completely destabilized
And
by
Jones,
this kind of narrative.
And Jones goes back and forth in various ways. I mean, for example, Jones will make these statements. Of course, people shouldn't do stupid things. People shouldn't, I'm not advocating this, that, and the other, but then he makes these statements like, everybody who is stuff that appears on the Alex Jones website, when he says that or claimed that COVID vaccines shipped to predominantly Republican areas, those vaccines were tainted, but not less to a lesser degree the vaccines that went to the Democrats. And then he quotes some other story that is not based on anything, but just a self-reporting database when people can make any claim and it's not immediately checked, and so they use that as a source.
People.
So it's like every imagine there's so many government workers in healthcare and biodefense, and if you say certain things, you make certain claims with no real evidence, then the average dude out there, if he gets a medical problem, he will then blame these mysterious globalists, and then what's the easy target? It's not the politician who is protected by a Secret Service. It's not the high rollers. It's these
the
average
poor guy
guys
that works at the gas station who gets blasted away by some lunatic with a gun.
And this German guy, he even said in court, "Yeah, I understand that. I mean, he wanted to. He didn't pick a high ranking target. He just picked a target he could reach, some young guy." Mm-hmm. And it's like a
poor guy that asked him to follow the rules.
And
it's imposed on everybody.
Weren't these Dugin guys, the copycats everywhere in the West? Mm-hmm. Weren't these Dugin guys all about tradition and nature and the mystique? And now they're saying, no, it's got to be robots, everything robots and super technology, and Russia is investing in nanotech and blah blah blah. I mean, it's paradoxical. They say everything under the sun.
Well, they're always inverting and flipping narratives. I mean, imagine the number one enemy of the communist bloc was America. They were the main enemy. And you've got Curtis Yarvin, 15, 20 years ago, saying point blank, well, America's the communist country. These other countries were just colonized by America. I mean, imagine saying that the communist bloc was the creature of the United States. Now that goes right. All these conspiracy people, immediately I can identify with this. Yeah. And of course, the libertarians and the anarcho-libertarians, already believe a version of this. When I met Ron Paul in April of 2001, he wouldn't listen to a thing I had to say. And he said, oh no, Russia and China are capitalist countries. America is the enemy now. The American state is our enemy, the state. It's the Americans that are the danger now. America is the danger. Yeah. It's like, what are you talking about?
And then we get this piece in the Byline Times, and it starts with this. Byline Times can exclusively reveal that a former U.S. Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE official, and longtime Musk employee working at PayPal, SpaceX, and now X, is connected to a movement for the revival of the Russian monarchy with close ties to the Russian government, including its ministries of defense and foreign affairs, and which believes Russia is engaged in a mortal civilizational war with the West. Okay, wait a second. What Russian monarchy? I mean, what does the average?
Well, it's interesting. Andrei Navrazov this week tweeted that he said, "Don't be surprised if they don't put up a phony czar all of a sudden in Russia." And have you seen these things about Russia's claim on Poland, saying the last monarch Poland had was the Tsar, and they showed the czars having a procession in Warsaw back in, I don't know, 1900 or something. I mean, this is the kind of propaganda. Now they're starting to say, and this is the Russian claim is, well, the Russian Empire, if we bring the Tsar back, then, well, we own Poland and Finland, because Poland and Finland were integral to the Russian Empire, 120 years ago.
Yeah, right? I mean, the regular, most of the Russian aristocracy was wiped out, right? And some of them fled, like this princess, which then fled to Hessen, and lived in the castle and married into the Metternich family. So a lot of them.
Well, who would be the Tsar now?
Yeah, I mean, you got to find some. Know? I mean, so some guys left, escaped, had to buy their way out of the communist expanding, program system. A lot of them were wiped out, and then we talk about the actual czars and the extended family of the czars. A lot of we call them Fürst. What do they call them? What do they call it? What's it called in English? It's like one step below the emperor, one step below the czar. It's like one of the highest ranks in aristocracy or monarchy. And so a lot of them, these Romanovs, were actually Schleswig-Holstein Romanov-Gottorp, because they were quite German. And so most of them and their families, most of them left. Okay, 4 of these higher ranking people, and that's a small fraction of those guys, 4 of them were allegedly murdered by the communists, but there's no credible body, and there's no real evidence that paints a clear picture. And then you have, of course, the whole thing with the last Tsar himself and his immediate family, and I took a good hard look at the actual evidence. And the investigations that happened immediately after the disappearance of the Tsar, the investigations were of terrible quality. And even the people who did the investigating, they had to admit that they didn't really know. And so that's a whole nother chapter. But so that was it. And so these people were from the European houses of Schleswig-Holstein, to a large degree, and Hessen, right? So this started a lot earlier, when these German families, they started sending their princesses to Russia, and they battled other high-ranking families, and eventually you had this solid foundation of Schleswig-Holstein, Romanov-Gottorp, and the House of Hessen, right? And so what Tsar are they gonna pull out of their hat now? I mean, what Germanic aristocrat can they find who would do this, or who would be credible? Because if you want to woo the Europeans, if you want to fool the Europeans, they gotta find a German guy. They gotta find somebody who's from the House of Hessen or from the House of Schleswig-Holstein, somebody who looks quite European and can speak in a European way. Right? Otherwise, it's just a sham. It's like cosplay. It's like play acting.
Yeah.
You put on a costume.
Since they slaughtered the Tsar's family in 1918, and the monarchy was abolished, there's no current recognized legitimate heir to the throne. There are, I think, there's descendants of the Romanov family who might claim to be legitimate heirs, but all the claims are disputed, and it's very confusing. So
the money
are you
grabbers.
referring to the Grand Duchess Maria Vladimirovna of Russia, the great granddaughter of Emperor Alexander II?
Well,
is that the one that has the best claim?
Well, there's some kind of embarrassing Romanovs around, and they don't have the format to be put in place, put in front of the cameras as a Tsar. They don't look the right way. They don't sound the right way. So that's a no-go, I think. And then they have some guys like this, what's his name? Prince Michael of Kent, one of these British guys. He's very closely related to the British royal family. It's like a cousin of the Queen or the late Queen or something. And there's this guy, and the Russians, they like him, and he's getting really old. I don't know if he's still around these days. And he has the look. He's done some weird lobbying stuff for the Russians, and that's when I think Channel 4 caught him, because some journalists from Britain, they posed as emissaries from some country, and they wanted to buy some sort of an audience with Putin or Putin's people. And they went through this British royal guy, and they said, hey, if we give you money, can you get us in contact with these high-powered Russians? And apparently this British royal guy's office said, yeah, let's come talk to us. We'll get something going maybe. So it was kind of embarrassing. So you have to find a guy who looks stunningly German, who looks like a king, who has the beard, who has a beard like yours, and who has the face for it, and who has the family legacy for it. Anything else would be silly costumes and cosplays. I mean, they're going to put a crown on some bureaucrat's head, some KGB guy who was in a judo club with Vladimir Putin back in the day. It's ridiculous. I mean, it has to have that quality that symbolizes this 1,000-year Reich of the Russians, which Putin, or 1,000-year plus Reich, which Putin was talking about in the interview when Tucker Carlson went to talk to Putin. And Putin gave this history lesson and saying, well, the Rurikids, 1,000 years ago, this is when Russia really happened, blah, blah, blah. So they would have to find somebody who's credible. Otherwise, it's going to be like
somebody
phony.
who could trace their line to Ivan the Terrible.
Well,
a descendant
but
of
somebody who is
before the Romanov.
Preferably a guy who has some kind of Rurikid history. I mean, some people claim that Putin has some background with the Rurikids, but that's probably just super small. It's like in Europe, right? When somebody says, "Well, I'm related to a royal house," well, bro, I mean, we know
after
that every
500 years, everybody's related to everybody else.
Yeah, but by 6 degrees of separation, you are related to the kings here. But it's like
because if you think about it, you got 2 parents, you got 4 great grandparents, you got 8 great grandparents. As you go back, it becomes a very, very large number. After 500 years,
and these illegitimate children. So most of these people, these aristocrats from Hessen and Schleswig-Holstein and Hanover and these places, most of these aristocrats, they had a good number of regular children inheriting these titles. So some of them, they had 8 children or 10 children. Queen Victoria had, of course, she's a very well-known example. She had a bunch of children. Called her the mother of Europe or something, but they used to do that all the time, and for every legitimate child they would have oftentimes several illegitimate children. And so this is, of course, the reason why some people are related to them. But it would have to be
the Russian government. The Russian government could claim just about anybody as a Tsar, and they could put him up there in a fancy uniform But
he has to look right.
I was surprised at Andrei's posting because it seems so incredible that the Russian Federation, having announced re-Sovietization a year ago in November, would actually have a Tsar.
Yeah.
Right? It seems to me just one of those nonsense narratives that they just put out there just to trick people just in the moment.
If you read some of these infamous communist writers before the revolution, I think it was Bakunin and some others, they actually floated different ideas when the Tsars were still around, and they one of these ideas was to have the Tsar remain in place, remove a bunch of these other aristocrats, these actual Russian aristocrats, remove those guys, and then have a socialist system below the Tsar. So you would still have the Tsar and signal this legitimacy internationally, still have a Tsar, but there's communism or a socialist system below him, right? And that was floated. This idea was floated around for a while. So I mean, they have a hybrid ideology these days. The Russians, they
have more than one.
Yeah, they have a Tsar, but it's also kind of fascist, and it's also communist, and it's like everything in between. They say they're modern, then they say they're anti-modern. It's like a grab bag of stuff, so everybody can find something that they like. And they actually do have in Russia in these modern days. They actually monitor the beliefs of the population, and so they know that only a fraction of these people in Russia are practicing Christians. I mean, a lot more are listed as Christians, but they don't practice that faith. There's a lot of occultism in Russia, occultism in Russia, and ideologically, some people are more like this, some people are more like that. So this is how they can mix together these ideological pieces to form a hybrid, so that people find enough to like. And it's like the hybrid that has 1,000 faces, so everybody can see the parts they like, buy the whole package, accept the whole package, and just ignore the other stuff and just pretend it's not there, or maybe it will change in the future. And so this story here in the Byline Times, it says that one of Elon's guys, he's running around with this Russian monarchist group and all that. And they say the same network has links via Musk's family to a 1930s techno-fascist movement. Okay, hold on a sec. The technocracy movement was also very, very socialist. It says, technocracy, the movement wanted to redraw the map of the United States to encompass vast swaths of territory from Canada to Greenland to Panama and Colombia, and dreamed of replacing democracy with an efficient authoritarian regime run by engineers, paralleling what the Trump-Musk administration is doing today. And so they did an investigation, and they say this close associate of Musk, a man called Brandon Spikes. Spikes worked at Doge for the first 2 months of Trump's second term before returning to his previous role as the director of information technology at X, which was Twitter. Blah, 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 blah. Here, the report confirmed that Spikes' ex-wife, whom he divorced in 2011, is a native Russian woman named Natalia Haldeman with ties to both Musk's family and to Kremlin-aligned civil society groups in the U.S. Now, of course, the Haldeman... Yeah, of course, the Haldeman name should ring a bell. And that family connection because of Elon's grandfather, right? And so Elon's grandfather, so he was in Canada, a member of this at the time very powerful technocracy organization. Excuse me. And so this organization had quite a few members, and they sounded like socialism. They said that we want to have a file system so everybody at birth is listed, and the system will determine what you will get throughout your life, and it's run by scientists and all that. And eventually, the Canadian government started to crack down against the group, and I think Elon's grandfather was arrested briefly, and that's when he discovered. Around that time when he discovered traditional conspiracy ideology, and eventually he moved with his family, if I remember correctly, he moved to South Africa because of racial segregation there. That was his. That was kind of the idea behind that move. It's important to realize that technocracy can have a socialist coat of paint or a fascist coat of paint or a monarchist coat of paint, but still underneath it all, it's just a system of control. And if you look at MAGAs, and if you look at people who now adore Elon, are all of these Elon fans or all of these MAGA people, are they all scientists or leading scientists and leading engineers? I think not. It's all kinds of people. And so it's like, what place will you have in an Elon-nocracy, as imagined by some people? You know, we can't really look into Elon's head, and I think he's playing different audiences.
The argument they make against democracy or against the democratic element in the Constitution is that all the degeneracy we see around us and wokeism and everything else is due to that democratic check in our constitutional system, and this misunderstanding that everybody says we're a democracy. You know, I guess it goes back to de Tocqueville. I think de Tocqueville was talking culturally the meaning of democracy, but the thing is technically we're only democracy every 2 years on a Tuesday in November when people vote. All the rest of the time, we don't have a vote. We don't get to decide anything. It's already decided in Washington by legislators and by the executive branch and by the judges in the courts. So the idea of democracy is only actually a very small element, but then there's public opinion. And that's very tricky if you go back to Kierkegaard in his writings on modernity, is that public opinion, Kierkegaard said, is a non-entity. It doesn't exist. It's a fake reality. Who is public opinion exactly? Who makes it? Who molds it? What creates it? There is no public. This is a monster in the imagination and all of our imaginations. There is no public. Who is it?
Yeah.
Right?
And
it's
also,
the polls. It's people doing this. They're licking their fingers and putting it in the air.
Yeah. And I mean, if we look into the science of being smart or how your brain functions and what it can do and cannot do, if we look into that science, I mean, people are familiar with the concept of IQ, and I understand it's like an evolving concept, and you can't just assign a number to a person because a brain is very
No.
complex, and
And it's all fake. It's all false because we're ruled by elites. All
yeah,
systems
and
is,
it's like,
as Robert Michel said, are oligarchic. We're in an oligarchy in which there's checks and balances and there's some voting, but we're in an oligarchy.
and if we
Democracy
look
is
at
just another way of organizing oligarchy.
yeah,
And people use these words like democracy and they don't know what they're talking about. And
yeah.
to blame democracy for degeneration is just a rhetorical tool that's being used by these dark enlightenment
Yeah,
people.
and we
That's
know
all it
that
is.
if we apply these standard aptitude tests, and it's not just IQ testing, it's different aptitude testings, and it's kind of standardized. Let's, for the sake of argument, if we use that rating system, let's say the average police officer in the United States is expected to have an IQ of about 100, which is the median, which is like the average.
Is that true?
Yes,
Is
yes.
that true?
I've looked into it. There was a guy who was
Oh my God.
there was a guy who was in well, it's a range. It's like from 95 to like 110. But if you get into the if you get higher than that, regular police, they don't want you. There was a guy who actually sued the government because he was in the, I think he had an IQ, as they tested him. He had an IQ of about, what was it, 125, which is decent according to the scale.
And they didn't want him?
No, the police refused him because they said he's overqualified. They expect if he joins the regular police force that he will be bored after 5 years and then leave the service. And so
All the training money will be lost.
Yeah, and the government, they have to pay for training a replacement of that guy. And they said,
Oh my gosh.
we don't want this guy. He sued the government and he was denied. He could not sue his way into the regular police force because the argument was, we're going to spend all that money to train the guy, and then he's going to leave.
He's overqualified, yeah.
He's overqualified.
Okay, so we got down this rabbit hole, but going back to the main point about
hang on a second.
IQ,
The last bit of this is people need to guess what was the average level of intelligence. The average level of intelligence of a Nazi goon, about 100. So you can either have a great police officers. I mean, there's so many great police officers with an IQ of 100 and a good personality and a focused mind and a good work ethic can be a great police officer, but a Nazi goon.
People's value should not be rated by their IQ. But the real point is that we are ruled by elites. And you go back to Christopher Lasch wrote a book called The Revolt of the Elites, where he talks about all of the degeneracy and the social pathologies that we see around us in modern Western society owe themselves to the things that are wrong with these elites. And of course, these elites have higher IQ. I think I have a friend who has over 180 IQ who says that people are in the 120s range of IQ are the most dangerous people in the world because they're super smart at getting what they want, but they don't have the higher intelligence to realize that the short-term aspects, the downfall of what they're doing. But there's
and so there's people who work in, let's say high IQ or whatever. There are people who work in, for this what they call it, the X department of this X department of the Russian intelligence, and they've studied the human mind and they've looked at all this data and they created algorithms. They probably stole that Cambridge Analytica stuff from the Americans. So they have a lot of data about Americans, they have a lot of data about Europeans, and they have algorithms, and they have really smart people working to manipulate the West. And so they know exactly what to say online to swing people's opinions over. And that's how they're managing this whole thing of public opinion, right? Yeah, and so when we look at Elon Musk, I mean, he's probably really smart, but he also exhibits some typical signs of quite a few people who are smart. It's like having a powerful brain. It's like a powerful machine, but it oftentimes happens when your brain is really powerful. It oftentimes has a lack of control. It becomes unstable. It's an unstable, powerful machine, right? So other people, they have a less powerful brain, but they have a lot more control over it. And we know that Elon is on medication, and there's some rumors about other things he's possibly trying to.
What medication's he on?
I think the last thing I've heard is prescribed microdosing of, I don't remember exactly,
of
ketamines,
hallucinogens, yeah,
ketamines and stuff. Well, it's like if there's a real doctor behind this, and if it's microdosing, I mean, it's like, yeah, it's, I don't know, it's how I feel about it, but
is his name Dr. Morrell?
I hope not. I hope not. and so you're talking about people that are a target for Russian operations. A target like Elon, who's very smart, is kind of struggling with his brain a bit, and maybe the Russians tried to use that, because a brain like Elon's, it craves order, it craves control, and the smarter you are, the higher oftentimes the higher the goals are that you set for yourself. And we know that Elon's goals have become larger and larger and larger, populating other planets and building, and conquering space. And Neuralink,
that is really crazy.
Yeah, and Neuralink,
populating other planets,
creating brain-computer interfaces where they actually screw down something into your skull, and it is interfacing between a computer and your brain. So his goals become larger and larger and larger. And when you're dealing with so many issues in companies and details, a part of your brain craves order and structure, because Elon's life is complicated, like everybody else's life is complicated by laws and regulations and elections and everything. And so I think that Elon's brain may be vulnerable to propaganda that is promising more order, more stability, rule by smart people. So of course he has to watch out for that. I mean, he should be smart enough to smell a trap.
To know history and to know this trajectory we're on is to know that we're headed for a very rough ride in the next decade. Yeah. Not to mention the global cooling that's taking place in the grand solar minimum. This is not. These people with their optimistic futurism and their idea that things are going to get better and better and we're going to be moving out to other planets and it's like we're going to be living like in the Jetsons cartoon, are completely out of touch with reality.
Yeah, and
to make political decisions on this basis is crazy.
And it seems so paradoxical. Right? Again, paradoxical. I mean, over the years or over the decades, I have sort of accepted situations that may seem as of now paradoxical, because you just don't understand it enough yet, or you just have to expand your understanding. So things may seem paradoxical, and you still have to look further. Sometimes a paradox means somebody made an outright mistake, or somebody is deliberately lying and giving out mixed messages, and it makes no sense, really.
Yeah, that latter one.
But it's like, isn't it one of the most paradoxical things that you have these smart people like Elon and what's this guy called? Brandon Spikes, who had this Russian wife who's connected to these Russian organizations.
All these people have Russian wives, don't they?
You have these smart
or Chinese
people.
Wives.
You have these very smart people who on a daily basis deal with these complex issues, yet at the same time, they seem to be hanging with a crowd which is promoting the most baseline primitive system ever. Russian monarchy. I mean, are you kidding me? Do you know how dysfunctional the Russian monarchy was? I mean, it was so badly organized, and it was so backwards. It wasn't, I mean, it's a
facade. Don't worry, Alex. It's just a facade.
Right until the 20th, right into the 20th century.
System they like already. They want to keep that one.
Yeah, right into the 20th century. Beginning of the 20th century, the Russian system, the Tsars and the aristocracy, the Russian system was the Russian system was not just stuck in medieval times, in medieval structures and standards. It was just like the ancient world,
Well,
peasants working the farms, and
yeah, they were illiterate. They didn't have any literacy
so
in
it's like
Russia. I mean,
how
it was
can
very low.
smart people dealing with this complex stuff and wanting progress over everything, how can these people dig kind of the stupid primitive concept of, well, we're just going to have a czar and he's going to command the scientists, and when what the czar says goes, and then the scientists, they can do their thing undisturbed, unmolested. I mean, it doesn't get simpler than that. I mean, shouldn't
Yeah,
any
no.
scientific
Well,
mind say, I don't think it's going to be that simple?
yeah. Well, Alex, I'm out of time, and I think we have to wrap up. Did you have any last thing you had to tell us?
Well, if people read this thing in the Byline Times, with the headline "Musk's Doge is inspired by pro-Kremlin monarchists and 1930s
Yeah.
technofascism," I mean,
Well,
they
we can see that in
they
Curtis
name
Yarvin's
yeah, I
thing.
mean
It's in there too.
they name a bunch of names and connections and organizations, and it's definitely something that we absolutely have to follow up on. But I'm kind of getting also a bit of Rockefeller vibes, because if people remember, the Rockefeller family with Standard Oil, they played nice. I mean, the Standard Oil, especially Standard Oil, played nice with the Nazis for a while, and then overnight, the Rockefeller men, they became involved in intelligence matters. They gave one of their buildings to British and American intelligence on American soil, and the Rockefellers, they were sort of part of that intelligence effort against the Nazis. So things are not always what they seem, and I think that when you reach a status like Elon, it's probably required of Elon to be more. It's required of people like Elon to be more involved in security matters and intelligence, and I don't think Elon can do whatever he wants. So it's like, yeah, I'm looking for the traitors. I'm looking for the cult members. I'm also kind of having an eye on, Rockefeller types who play nice with the enemy for a while and then they flip. And like Ford, Ford publishing the bogus protocols of Zion and the International Jew. Ford doing this, and then Ford made all Ford did all this war production for the United States, squashing the Nazis. So I'm also looking for that. Let's put it this way.
Yeah. Well, it's yeah. All of these people, rich people, elites, they've been messed up for a while. So anyway, I'm Jeff Nyquist. This has been Friends and Enemies. My co-host has been Alex Benesch. He's in Germany. I'm Jeff Nyquist in the United States. Thank you for joining us in this discussion, and we'll be back next week with another edition.